Great. Thank you so much, everyone, for staying around for the rest of the day. I know it's been a long day, and everyone's probably pretty tired, and it's already late in the day. For me, though, it's only 4 a.m. in my local time zone. So I'm definitely struggling a little bit with the time zone difference, as usual. But I'm going to make this hopefully as productive and educational and interesting for you as possible, and also ensure that we try to finish up by 1700, as is on the agenda, or excuse me, 1900. So that way we can all get on with the party to follow. So with that, let's go ahead and start here. You all, I think we're probably all of you here this morning, so you heard a little bit about my talk, and you heard about some of the projects that I get involved in. The reality is, I don't really tell you this so much to impress or upon you in any way. I really tell you more because it gives you maybe a feeling of the type of experience I deal with, because it is going to be different than your experience. Each of our experiences will be different on our data centers and what we deal with. And size isn't really so much an indicator of any sort of knowledge or expertise. Really what it does is it allows us to replicate things over and over again. So I've been fortunate enough to be able to try a lot of different things, a lot of different ways over the years. And because of that, I've been also see a lot of trends over the years. And a lot of the trends in the data center industry I've noticed have really started with the very big data center projects, those Google and Microsoft and Yahoo and others put on, and certainly now Facebook and eBay and even Amazon. And they start with those really big projects, and they really tend to transcend down through all of the different data centers. And so eventually a lot of the things that I work on will make it to the more commonplace things in the industry. So kind of some things to think about, and maybe some of the things I'm thinking about, they may not necessarily apply to your data center project today, but maybe they will in the future. And that's the thing to think about, is think about things a little differently. And as we're talking about today with cloud, there's a lot of different ways of doing business today than we have done in the past. So with that, we certainly have a lot of technology changes. I'll talk about some more in depth of those. I talked a little bit about the metering and measurement and sharing of that data. I'll talk a little more about those in depth today too. And some of the different solutions that I mentioned this morning as far as software, hardware, and also infrastructure, I'll dive into some of those. And so let's see, I think the main thing, of course, why do we even care about efficiency in our data centers? Of course, time is money, and that's probably number one, but money is money, right? If we save money, we have more in our pocket. And so for every dollar that we save our companies on the operations of our data centers, we ultimately, of course, allow several more dollars to go back on the revenue side, because there's some sort of a ratio there. And so several more dollars back on the revenue side adds more money into the company, allows us to do more things with it. And so that dollar that is saved on the operations side, no matter where it's saved, has a tremendous value to the company. It allows us to put more money into R&D, more money into marketing and sales and growth of the company. So hence, efficiency is important from a variety of ways, but really just break it down to the bottom line, right? It's money. When I talk about these projects, I've been involved in a lot of projects for a lot of companies, and the average return on the investment is around 56% of the projects I've been involved in over many years. So 56% return on investment. Think about that. That'd be like if you came to me and said, here's 100 rupees, Casey, would you invest it for me? And I'll say, sure, come back a year from now, and I'll give you 156 rupees. That's a tremendous investment. I mean, anybody would say absolutely yes to that. And so when you're selling this within your company or selling ideas, think about that return on investment, what that really means to the company. Try to do that math. And if it comes out to anything probably above 25%, most likely a CFO is going to say absolutely yes, go do it. I mentioned earlier that energy costs are definitely rising. So that means the forward value of any efficiency improvements we make will be worth even more than it is today. So whatever we do the math at today, expect it will be worth more in the future. And this is especially true for a variety of different reasons. Not only will energy costs go up, but basically all the cost of operating servers will probably continue to go up in a variety of ways, and I'll talk about some of this going forward. And certainly, I talked about the PUEs this morning. I talked about the net present values, so I won't dive in a lot of that. But also it comes down to our health and infrastructure and so forth. In the United States, about 11 years ago in California, we were having energy crisis, and we didn't have enough power to go around. And we were being asked to shut down our data center. So imagine just being shut down your data center. Just say, okay, that's it. We got to set the power off for the next few hours, right? in California, we're not allowed to run a backup generation for more than but a few hours a year anyways. And so we couldn't really just go and run on generation during those times. It was a forced shutdown. So we came together and we said, okay, if we all conserve energy in our data centers just enough, maybe we can avoid that next rolling blackout on the energy grid, right? And then we can all stay up and running our data centers instead of all of us going down and being forced to black out. Imagine all of our data centers completely blacking out and being gone, not being on and operational for several hours, right? That's what we were being asked to do. So you think about this, you take it to kind of these levels where we do have energy shortages in many parts of the world, including certainly throughout parts of India. It can really, you can start seeing those effects that you can have. For every little bit you save in energy, it starts having a bigger and broader effect on the overall grid and the overall health of all data centers. So, this has kind of become apparent. I think some of you are probably familiar with the report that the US EPA put out in 2006, where they basically said about 3% of all the electricity in the US is consumed by data centers. Different regulations and mandates can come about. So it really matters to me a lot because I've been part of a lot of these discussions I've been in discussions with 2 US presidents now, several congressional members in the US, and several heads of state in other countries, all about the electricity use of data centers. And in every single case, if we didn't conserve or didn't show that we were going to be efficient, they were going to put mandates on us to reduce our energy use. So it's better to have that control in your own hands and be able to save that money for your companies than being forced to do it in some other way. There's an important kind of point to make in all this is that the bottom line is, as an industry, we are growing. We are so fortunate to be part of an industry growing. Obviously, we all know in the world's economy, there are struggling parts of the economy. But in the data center industry, we are growing. So we are so lucky to be part of that growth industry. And a big part of that growth it's been many things, right? It's obviously been the number of users that we've been adding onto the internet. It's been what we've been doing with our servers as far as data analysis, data mining, data collection, what we do, what we provide back, and of course mobile computing and how much we're using that, and all the information that we're bringing to essentially everybody. Nearly everybody in the world today is on the internet. That statistic is fascinating because 5 years ago, it was about 1.5, maybe 2 billion people at the most were on the world's internet. So call it roughly about, anywhere from say, 10 to 20% probably of the world's population was on the internet about 5 years ago. Today, we're pretty much at saturation, right? Anybody who can pretty much type on a keypad is probably on the internet in some fashion. In the US, we usually have about, on average, about 3 to 6 internet-enabled devices per person. That's a lot, right? Think about it. I mean, how many times can we be connected to the internet once? It's many times. Apple is making their bank that the iCloud, right, this thing that connects all of their different Apple devices together at the same time seamlessly, is going to be a great feature and value of their product set. No doubt about it, it already is. Many people are already too much struggling with all these different devices. Right? And ultimately, what does this lead to? It really leads to data, lots of data. We all know we're getting more emails, right? We're on the internet more. We're posting more photos on Facebook. We're placing things to buy on Amazon or eBay, right? But the bottom line is it's also data mining. And if we look at a good example is I was working with a very large financial institution. We were working on a 100-megawatt data center for them. And 100 megawatts of IT load is a big data center, no doubt about it. But the interesting part about it is, again, this is a financial institution that does predominantly trading, meaning, trading stocks. 95% of that data center's load was going to not their core business, trading stocks. It was actually going to purely data mining, collecting data. And what do they do with this data? They collect it, they do analyses on it, and then it tells them back what stocks they should buy tomorrow or next month or next year. What kinds of things are probable to come about so they know how to play the stock markets to their advantage, right? So this is the world today. I just was part of working on a data center project for eBay. This entire new data center was really data analysis, data mining, data warehousing. If I look at what most companies, and I can't get into some of the details for some of these companies I work with, but it's really collecting data. So just about a little less than a month ago, I was at lunch with the guy who heads data center operations for Google and the guy who runs data center operations for eBay and a few other folks in that room. And we were sitting down at lunch, and I asked, what do you think is going to be the big issue of this year, of 2012? And every single one of them around that table, the table about the same size as what you have here today, said the same thing. It's going to be big data and the management of that big data. How do we deal with it and so forth? The guy at eBay told me that they're doubling their data about every 3 to 6 months. So imagine that. Every 3 months to every 6 months, somewhere in that range, you're doubling the total amount of data you have as a company. Yeah, it's kind of staggering, isn't it? Now, granted, these are big examples, but it tells you about where we're going, right? That this collection of data and the use of data is also vital to what we do and to the product set that we provide back to our companies. Because let's face it, email is interesting, but it's not what we're doing as data centers, right? It's all this other value we provide back. So you have to kind of think ahead. Now, as an industry, we're doubling the amount of data at about every 18 months today, right? So that eBay example is a pretty fast-paced one compared to where others are at. But still, doubling the amount of data every 18 months, this is tremendous when considering that the total amount of data in the world we doubled from the time of Christ to 1850, right? So in 1850 years, we doubled the total amount of data in the world. It took us another century to double it again, and then at least another decade to double it once again. Now we're doubling this data at the rate of almost once a year. And I will bet by the time we get to the end of this year or beginning of next year, that's about the rate as an industry we're doubling the amount of data. That means the amount of data in the world, the amount of data we're collecting and warehousing in our data centers. Which means two things, right? One is we will need more data centers. So that's number one. And that's good, right? That means we're all going to be busy. Number two, it means that there's going to be these data centers are going to get bigger, and it's going to be harder to necessarily also justify sometimes all these costs. So we're going to have to become more energy efficient. So let's see. In the U.S., it cost us roughly about $10 million U.S. per megawatt of IT load. We was talking megawatts of IT load to build a data center. Most of the people I work with were more in the $5 million U.S. per megawatt of IT load. This has been going down, so this is good. And it's going down because of those things I talked about earlier today. Really taking a look at what exactly do we need our data centers and really managing the efficiency of them and the geographic diversity of them. I already mentioned earlier today that servers definitely cost more to operate than they do to buy, and that trend is still continuing to proceed in that same fashion, meaning that our servers still are costing us more to operate than they have yesterday, and costing us less to buy than they did yesterday. The difference is that trend is going to start changing, and I'll talk about this, some of the technologies coming about. And it really comes down to semiconductors and what we're doing with them. Semiconductors for the first time are not needing more energy to still continue to provide more compute capacity. Now, based over the last 5 years, let me kind of clarify that. Over the last 5 years, Intel's processing performance on their processors has basically increased about 25x. And the energy use has increased about 6x. So the bottom line is they are becoming more efficient, but they're still needing more energy. So let me clarify what that means. What I just said is that the processors of tomorrow, really that means those that are already hitting us the streets today, are not needing more energy. They're actually needing the same or less energy while still providing more compute capacity. So these are very vital kind of things to watch, is that our servers are not just getting more efficient. We're not actually going to need to have more data centers in the future for server capacity. We'll need it for storage capacity, but we won't need it for server capacity. And I think a lot of great examples have been talked about today as far as the cloud and the solutions that people are gaining through virtualization and other and cloud computing and other methods, that they're actually not needing more data center capacity in order to get compute capacity. We've already reached this point. So if you continue to refresh and stay up on the IT technologies, you will continue to actually need less data center capacity while still getting your companies more compute capacity. So it's really the storage that's the key driver of this, and that's what's ultimately going to become really the majority of your IT load and where the focus and challenges will be in the future. Now, I just want to kind of paint a quick picture here. As I've talked about some of these concepts that saving money or saving energy is saving money, and it matters both in operations but also in capital. And this is an actual example of a data center. This was a small module of a data center that we focused on that basically is about a 1.9 megawatt IT module. So 1.9 megawatts total. I shouldn't say it as IT load. It's about 1.5 megawatts of IT load, the rest being infrastructure. So roughly 2 megawatts total load, 1.5 of IT. But we did some consolidation, as has been talked about here today, right? That's a lot of virtualization. We actually downsized the UPSs because now we didn't need as much UPS, right? We also took a look at the redundancy while doing that. We also downsized basically the mechanical systems because we went and did some more economization. And the result of all this is that basically we took a nearly 2 megawatt total load down to about a half megawatt total load. Right? This is a real world example. So now all of a sudden we have a half megawatt total load for the same compute performance. Right? And this is not over any big stretch of time period. This is just a normal refresh cycle, normal virtualization, right? Normal economization, normal strategies. These aren't really anything really out there. So what does that gain us back? Right? It gained us back more than almost a megawatt and a half of total load in our data center, which means now we can use that megawatt and a half of electricity capacity for other types of data center functions. So everybody's power constrained, right? Like I said, I've worked on projects in 25 countries, data center projects. In every single case, utilities are always, for the most part, the limitation as far as how big we can build it. I'm working on a couple of 300 megawatt data centers right now in China, right? And 300 megawatts is a lot. Well, they have to be pretty much connected to the power plants. I'm developing a large data center campus that's in just outside of California, Nevada, where it has a lot of unique tax advantages, but it also has a lot of unique power advantages. And it has a tremendous amount of power capacity, over a gigawatt of power capacity available at the campus, right? And part of why we're developing it this way is that the power is connected to the data center, or the data center is connected to the power plant. So this way, you don't have to worry about those transmission lines going down, and also you don't have to worry about the capacity not being there tomorrow when you need to grow. So this is how people are starting to think about data centers, because they're getting so large in some cases, or because we're always power constrained. So if you save that energy in your data center, whether it's IT or infrastructure, it doesn't matter where it's saved, right? You now have more spare capacity to spend to grow with in the future for storage or whatever else it is you need. So let's talk about some of these, ways we save money and thus saving energy. I always say start with measurement first and foremost. Understand what you have. If you don't know what you really have as far as energy consumption and where your energy in your data center is going, then it's really hard to make any really good decisions as to how to save money, where you're going to save it, and how you are saving it. So focus on that. With DCIM and all the various different tools that are out there, hardware and software integrated tools that allow us to monitor our data centers and all the different components of them, not just infrastructure, but also IT loads, we can really see what's happening. And by seeing this in real time, we can then make improvements and see changes happening because of the load and demand and so forth and how we're changing it. So really focus on good metering in place. Understand what your IT loads are doing, your infrastructure loads are doing, how they vary with time, how they vary with demand and other changes. And really put all that information to use into some really good, useful metric so that everybody in the organization understands what that metric is and is driving towards the same thing. So think about it in terms of your business. And I'll give some examples of this in a minute, but really think about what does your business sell? Don't think about it from an IT perspective. Think about it, okay, what does my business make? What kind of products do we sell? And try to put that back into a metric that relates to the money your company makes, revenue, and how you make it. So a good example is I said at Google, it's watts per search. At eBay, it's watts per transaction. At Yahoo, it's watts per page served. Very simple metrics that everybody can understand because it relates back to the revenue stream of that company. And then of course, when you think about, when you have all this data, now you can actually start putting it into metrics that are useful for CFOs. And so when you go to sell your ideas and say, CFO, I want to have some more money so I can make some improvements to our data center in order to save money back. Now, if you put it in some terms that the CFO can understand, it makes it very easy to go and get that money. So I mentioned this before as well earlier today, but I just want to mention it once again. Have everybody working towards the same thing, right? So that means that everybody in the real estate facilities, IT operations, data center operations, right? Who chooses the servers to buy, all that, have everybody working together. It may be one person, which makes it very easy, but make sure everybody in that company is focused on how to improve the efficiency, cost, and energy efficiency of your data center on the terms of the same metric. And with that, you'll get the biggest bang for the buck or the best changes right there, just because everybody's focused on the same thing. So I talked about, PUEs and what's good and so forth, and there's a variety of information and tool sets out there. Green Grid's put out a lot of great information. Certainly a lot of this information is free, so it's pretty easy to come about. Definitely do your research and find out what's out there. And the key really when it comes to data center efficiency is really in two areas, right? On the infrastructure side, it's predominantly in cooling. That's where we save most of our energy. The electrical side, it's more difficult to save money on. It's a little harder to tweak it out, and it takes generally some bigger upgrades. We have to generally replace UPSs to become more efficient UPSs, take out steps of transformation, things of that nature in order to improve the efficiency of the electrical system. Sometimes we also just put in more efficient transformers that reduce losses. Either way, these are kind of expensive investments. On the mechanical side, usually we can do some fairly inexpensive investments. We might add some additional economization if it's a water-cooled chiller. Or if we can, and we've done this in a lot of buildings, we even punch holes in the building, essentially like cutting holes in the building to put windows in, to put louvers and vents and draw more air in from outside at the times when it's cool enough. And you might say, oh my gosh, these examples, of course, applied based on the environment. Some environments may not be able to do it. But I brought up an example earlier today where eBay's running a data center in 120-degree Fahrenheit heat that's fully economized, right? So I can't do the quick translation of what that is in centigrade, but somewhere in the 40, 45 degrees centigrade range, very hot, and fully economized. And they're doing this because basically economize at night as much as they can when it's cooler out. Just like here in Mumbai, it's also cooler at night. You can do a variety of different things. And then during the daytime, you economize less, but things might heat up a little bit, or they do heat up, but you still just live with that. So your folks work in the data center at night because it's cooler, and they don't work in there in the day if they can avoid to. Now these are, of course, concepts that work for some folks' data centers and not for all, but just ideas to think about. You don't have to necessarily economize all the time. You can economize some of the year, and that's still improving your PUE because it's an annual average. So reducing total use over the year. And again, I talked about the close coupling, and I'll maybe bring up a couple examples of that, and also reducing fan horsepower. Very key things. VFDs on everything, it makes a dramatic difference. Like I said, in every example we've worked on, the savings are tremendous. And I'll even show you an example case study of one of those projects we worked on where we can share the data. So in these metrics, there's a lot of metrics out there, and I've talked about this, but the key is, get yours. And I list a whole bunch up here. Some of you are probably familiar with some of these. PUEs, one we're all familiar with. DCIE, of course, reciprocal of that. Total cost of ownership, one we all know. There's EUE, energy use efficiency, which is really now just today's PUE. There's water use efficiency, carbon, utilization efficiency, and so on, right? There's a bunch out there. Find whatever works for you, or use a whole, a grouping of them. That way you can track it in different ways. So let me kind of talk about the metrics here and some of these and how this would work for some folks. One company focused on the revenue generated per ad and over the cost of the content for each ad served. So the cost, of course, is all your data center cost, and the revenue is just that. So you can see exactly how does this play out. If it costs me 10 cents to serve an ad and I'm only making 12 cents on it, it's probably not a very good business proposition, right? But if I can get those costs down, I can see, well, my cost of my ad maybe doesn't change. It's still maybe 12 cents for what I'm making for the ad. But if I can get my cost down from, let's say, 10 cents to 8 cents, you're going to be a hero because now you just doubled the profitability of that company, all right, for that product set. So now you can actually rate in turns and say, CFO, instead of going and saying, CFO, I want to have $1 million to make improvements to the data center, you go, CFO, I want $1 million so I can double the profit of this company. And now all of a sudden, the CFO is his ear's going to perk up and say, what? What'd you just say? Sit down, please. Let's spend a little time and talk about this, right? And this is exactly how I went about it with one company years ago. And boy, let me tell you, CFO is ready to spend money immediately when you put in those terms, whereas before he wasn't. Another company, does financial transactions, simply that. You say, okay, what's the cost of financial transaction, right, under the cost of actually what it is you're doing with the financial transaction, the money you're making. And another company that's really kind of more of a logistics type company, they looked at, again, what's their supply chain throughput versus the cost of that throughput, right, or the overhead. So these are just kind of some examples. I said I'd give you some examples to think about, right, to help you really put things in a perspective that everybody, all the managers and executives of the company can really jump on board with. Who here is familiar with Scintilla, by a show of hands? Okay. Scintilla is a great company. It's a fairly young company, still fairly small. It's one of the very common San Francisco Bay Area technology startups. They've been around for many years. They're not so much a startup anymore, but nonetheless, they really provide a great, I'll call it a tracking tool or analysis software that really helps you understand not just what's taking place in your data center, all these different costs, but putting in some terms that make it very easy for you to see. And I'm not selling them. I'm not, in any way, trying to put a commercial out for them. I get nothing back at all from Scintilla. I just wanted to kind of show as one example of a product out there that is really good at doing that, because data is great so long as you can make good use of it, but you have to make good, quick use of it. And Scintilla is one of the products out there, software products, that helps you do that quickly and easily. OSI is another good example of one. So here's maybe an example of a company we're all familiar with, right? Google. They certainly have no short reach around the world, and certainly here in India. And we probably I'm sure many of you are familiar with this. This is a study they've already published, and this is even a little out of date now. There's even a little bit updated version of this, but this is a study of their data centers. And you can see over time, their data centers are becoming more efficient, right? The PUE is coming down, so it's more energy efficient on the infrastructure side. Now, the way that Google measures it, they're actually a little bit hard on themselves. They're actually more efficient than what this shows, because they actually save more energy and more money on the IT side than they do on the infrastructure side. But saving money on the IT side doesn't improve the PUE. Only saving energy on the infrastructure side does. So they're actually saving far more money and improving their efficiency of the data center far greater than what these graphs show. But I think one of the key points here is I wanted to point out, we see this in every data center, is you see the graphs that just have started very recently. Those are new data centers, right? And as they start, you notice they spike up, because all of a sudden the loads start coming on, and they start tweaking the operations, right? They start looking at how the load comes up, and they say, wow, we're becoming less efficient as we're adding load. So they monitor that, and they quickly discern, within a quarter, they quickly see that, hey, we're becoming less efficient, right? And these aren't big differences in numbers here. You notice the scale on the side, right? They may go from a 1.3 to a 1.32 on their PUE. Not a big difference at all, right? By any stretch, they're measuring down to very high resolution. But they see that, and they immediately start making changes, so much so that you see the next quarter, the PUE actually drops tremendously. And then you see a little bit of more variability, because now they go into maybe their first summer, and it's hot, and they have to start tweaking the operations again. So they're constantly monitoring, constantly changing, constantly tweaking the operations and the systems so to become more and more efficient over time. And that's the key that they want to drive to. They ultimately want to keep seeing this graph go all the way down to really 1, which is a perfect PUE. Whoop, wrong button. Okay. So I mentioned this earlier as well, and I'll just reiterate once again, is that one of the greatest things you can do to save energy in your data center is have all of your teams working together. That means anybody that touches the data center, whether they have a direct relationship in the data center or an indirect one. So all these different folks have them all working together, all working for the same, again, metric I mentioned, all focused on the efficiency, all getting reports as to what that efficiency says, and making changes for it regularly. And it's amazing what happens. In companies where I've been in, where all of a sudden we start sharing the data and the efficiency of our data centers. Every single day, that data changes. And I'll walk in, and somebody will be at my desk when I arrive at the office saying, Casey, I noticed our efficiency, didn't get quite as good, yesterday as it could have. Or I just thought of another change. And here's what I think we could do. All of a sudden, you have everybody working together. So now you have 20 or 30 good heads instead of just one, all working towards the same purpose. So this is a very key in everything, and make sure everyone's working together and all sharing good knowledge and information. I'm sure that most of you are already doing this today, so I don't want to overemphasize it, but I want to make sure it's clear. As much as you can, share your data, share your knowledge, all work together, all work towards those same metrics, all work towards the same common goal, and the achievements right there will be the greatest. You'll get your greatest success just from that alone, because everybody will be working towards the same common goal. So let's talk a little about the design of data centers, because obviously, you know, when we build new data centers, we have to make sure we are very focused on the design of them, so efficient as they can be. And as I said earlier, it's not just about reducing the operating expense, but also about reducing the capital expense in building data centers. And I'll lead in as to how these designs also come into retrofits, because a lot of things are very much the same. So I talked about this a little bit earlier. Location really matters. And we don't always have a choice in location, but many times we do. And I'll say often that network is ubiquitous. And what I mean is that you can get fiber anywhere in the world. And I know this varies, and India is one actually of those countries where it is a bit challenging to get fiber in many places. But in many countries of the world, the network infrastructure is deregulated. So you can get it anywhere, anytime, and get it usually quite inexpensively. So the location from a fiber perspective usually doesn't matter a lot. It really matters, are you close enough to your users? And a good example, if I look at Google and I say, where are their data centers? They're not anywhere near the metropolitan cities. Nowhere near them at all. They put them far away from them, actually, intentionally. Because A, the energy costs are lower, the climate's usually better, right? And there's also less risk of human-caused disasters and stuff like that. It's actually easier to get to a location that's usually more remote. If you look at where Facebook's put their data centers, the last data center they put in is a town of about 2,000 people. 2,000 people. For a data center, we are hiring over 200 people. So 10% of that city will be working at one data center. It's not that close to anything. One of the last big data centers I built for Yahoo was in a town of 5,600 people. 5,600 people, that's it. All right? And it was a 2-hour drive to the nearest city. And not only was our data center there, but Microsoft's data center was there in town as well. So during construction, we had over a quarter of that town's population working to build our data center. Right? These are challenging places to work and build data centers, right? But we do it because there's so many advantages to be in those places. And one of them is weather. And part of the reason why I'm developing this technology park outside of Reno, and that's my role with the Unique Infrastructure Group, a CTO, is building that large technology park because we need no air conditioning equipment all year long, period. So when someone builds a data center there, we build a data center for them there, they need no chillers, no compressors at all for air conditioning. It's 100% economized all year long. So tremendous savings in capital costs, a tremendous savings in operating expense. Plus, it actually increases the reliability. So think about if you add air condensation to a data center. Today is, let's say, a water-cooled chiller plant. Now you actually have a second cooling system with air condensation. Even if it's hot outside, you can at least still bring air in when the chiller system plant crashes and it completely shuts down. Instead of everything just heating up and you have to shut all your servers down, you can at least now open up your louvers, bring in outside air. Even if it's temporarily hot, right, hotter than you want it to be, at least you can still provide some cooling effect to the data centers. One of the key things that we really focus on is water cooling. And most of the projects I work on where we have no compressors, no chillers, it's almost always water economized. It's hard to get air economization all year round in many climates. But we can water economize a lot, and we generally don't do enough of that. And we always way oversize the water economization system because the more we oversize it, the more capacity we get, air capacity for the future, but also the more efficient we get out of the system when it's running all the time. Now, I mentioned this concept of the power parks, and there are minimal efficiencies gained there. We're going to much higher voltages from the grid, and so we can not only cut back on some of the transformation losses and reduce that to some extent. We can buy power at a lower price. But the real advantage of connected to central power parks is often we need no backup generators. And that may seem really kind of like a foreign concept, a data center with no backup generators, right? Imagine that concept. But we're already building them today, right? And Facebook was one example I mentioned of a company that we're working with right now where I helped take them to Sweden for their next data center location. And part of the reason why is because the grid is so reliable, they don't need any backup generators. At the Reno Technology Park, the park that I'm developing, again, a very large technology company is considering doing the same thing and with their data center. And this for a very critical core application, one that we all use daily, right? So yes, you don't always need all these things because if you look at the grid reliability, you say, well, the grid reliability is 5 nines, and if you're right next to the power plants in some cases. Well, 5 nines of grid availability is better than what you can get out of your backup generators. So you go, my backup generators don't add anything. This is where I have to start thinking about what am I really adding by adding this next piece of equipment. And in many cases, you're actually not adding anything. You're decreasing the reliability because you made it more complex. There's now more things to fail, more things to maintain, more likely things to break and fail. And so actually by taking things away, we make it more efficient. This is what I learned at Google many years ago. We started realizing if we take things away in the mechanical electrical system, we can make it a lot more efficient. Cheaper to build, but a lot more efficient to operate. So, and that's where it comes down to reliability, and this was a key thing I learned at Google as well, is that we started taking a look at that reliability and realized we don't need the standard Tier 3 or Tier 4 reliability. Tier 2 was good enough. It was more than good enough. It was actually better. And especially when you have at least 2 data centers that fell over to each other, right? And for Google and Yahoo, most of your companies, they have at least 3 data centers that fell over to each other in the same geography. The same geography means, or same region means probably a continent. So same thing resides here in Asia. Data centers in Mumbai, Singapore, Hong Kong, Tokyo, Taipei, and they all can fail over to each other. And the reality is, all I have to do is be as fast as that now local internet connection back to the user, and you're still as fast, as the user experiences no difference in uptime. So this is why Google and Yahoo and others all the time are constantly shutting down data centers. It happens all day long. Shutting down equipment in data centers, moving, and the loads automatically move over to other data centers. That our data center might be, it might be 5,000 kilometers away, but it doesn't cause any difference in the user experience at all. Now, granted, these are, everybody's applications are different and so forth, but the reality is we have to kind of really think about exactly what do we need, right, when it comes to reliability, and make sure we're planning for that and thinking about that exact need. So if we really think about it holistically, we can start to come up with these solutions. And certainly I mentioned this earlier, modularity is key. It's been talked about several other times today. I think we're all familiar with the idea of modularity, making sure we're just building it as we need. So instead of building one big data center and waiting to fill it, just build little components, little modules, add little bits at a time. We typically do this in the US, even these big data centers. We build the building, and then we just keep building out little phase after little phase after little phase. And we always stay ahead by one phase. So modularity is really key to efficiency because we're always running the equipment at its peak load or peak, and therefore its peak efficiency curve. So let's talk about some other things. I mentioned some of these other things earlier. I'll just kind of reiterate just quickly. Humidity controls. Like I said, in most of the data centers I work on, we don't have any at all. If we do have them, it's somewhere between 0% to 90%. It's very, very broad. Again, this works in some data centers, it works in some locations, doesn't work in all. But the bottom line is we generally don't need much humidity control, if any at all. What's a server made of? Plastic, metal, and silicon, all right? And some other, that's it, really. So none of that stuff is going to get hurt by humidity unless it's raining on it. The boards are all coated, so again, even if it rained on it, generally it's not even going to impact it. So humidity usually is an issue, right? Dramatic temperature, or humidity swings can be an issue for reliability, but that's pretty rare and very difficult to actually get. Temperature really doesn't matter for the most part, as long as we're within some reasonable operating parameters. One thing to keep in mind is that most of the servers, their fans speed up when they hit about 77 degrees Fahrenheit. I think that's about 24, 25 degrees C. So then we actually need more UPS load because now we have a little more load in our servers as fan speeds speed up when we get to that temperature range. So we did it, Yahoo and Google, and also Facebook's doing the same things. You work with your vendors, your manufacturers, whether it's Dell or HP or Supermicro or Foxconn or Huawei or whomever it is, and you say, look, I want you to build my next server or next piece of networking gear or storage gear. I want you to build it so the server fans or the fans in that box don't actually ramp up until they hit 35 C or whatever it is. And if you're buying enough of this equipment, or if you stipulate it, you will get that change made. Doesn't mean everybody can, but these are just things to think about. Filtration. Generally speaking, we have very little filtration. It's really just keep dust from building up on the floor for more of a safety thing. It's not really for a server thing. So make sure you're not over filtering. The servers, again, don't need all this filtration. It doesn't harm them at all. Intel's been running their data centers without filtration for, I think, almost 5 years now. And they're finding no issues. They see plenty, coating of dust and other things, but they don't see issues due to it. The key really in good, efficient data center design has always been, and we see this with the biggest dramatic swing we can do, is always really good hot and cold isolation. So it doesn't matter how you're doing it. whether it's a vendor's really sophisticated product or refrigerator strips, as long as you're separating the hot and cold airstream, you get dramatic effects back for it. We see that the biggest effect. Who here is doing hot and cold isolation in the data centers? Okay, so it looks like I don't see any hands up. So it is dark out there, but this is one that this is the most important thing you can do if you want to save money and on your data center operations on the infrastructure side is separate those hot and cold airstreams. That's where you get the biggest bang for the buck. There's not an example that doesn't show otherwise. And not only do you get the biggest bang for your dollar or rupee, right, you will save a tremendous amount of money, but you actually get more capacity back from your equipment. I'll give you an example that I worked on. This is an Oracle data center where we actually went ahead and we implemented hot and cold isolation. The crack units were 30-ton crack units, fairly old design. This was built back in 2001, I think. Yeah, 2002 was when this data center was built. Had these air-cooled crack units, 30 tons each. The effective tonnage that we were getting out of those crack units was about 12 tons each instead of the 30. And the reason why is we weren't getting much of a delta T, right? A very big temperature differential between the output and the inlet temperatures on that crack unit. We had a lot of short cycling of the air and so forth going on. And we also had a lot of wear and tear on the compressors. We were losing a lot of compressors on those units. They're banging on and off a lot. As soon as we did the hot and cold air isolation, also now we had an effective tonnage come back from those crack units of 27 tons, right? And a few of them, we actually tweaked it and got a little bit more than even 30 tons, more than their rated capacity. And that's because our delta T went from about 4 to 5 degrees Fahrenheit all the way up to about 15 to 20 degrees Fahrenheit. So by that increased delta T, we get more effective tonnage back from those crack units. So by actually doing the hot and cold air isolation, we actually got to shut crack units off. We shut off half of the crack units and still had spare capacity. So these things really can matter a lot when it comes to these things. Not just, like I said, saving energy, saving money. It saved us to have to go and put in more crack units when we were adding more density for some long time to come. I mentioned earlier today the tape storage areas. I don't think many people are using tape. Who are still using tape? Anyone out there? Okay. I know it's pretty uncommon. I worked on a big data center project a little while ago. It was a big supercomputing center for weather analysis. And they have a lot of tape because they have basically every single weather record in the entire world going back as long as those records exist. So it's a lot of data that they use. But those are pretty rare nowadays. So if you have tape, though, we always say put it in a different room, different environment, since they need different environmentals. So let's see. I am going to, let's see, the efficiency and design. Some of these things I already talked about here. The key really here is that as we get more efficient, we need less equipment, right? Just as an example, I just gave you that Oracle data center. They needed less crack units as we added those crack units, or as we made those crack units more efficient. Right, as we made the cooling system more efficient, now they needed less of them. So let's talk about some of these examples here. These inlet temperatures I mentioned, 27 to 35 degrees C is totally common nowadays. In the US, it's kind of almost, if you're any big user of data centers, you'd almost be considered strange not to have a minimum inlet temperature about 27 to 30 degrees C. Huge savings. For every 1 degree inlet temperature that we change, every 1 degree, we get back about a 2.5% to 3% savings on the energy side. Big difference. I mentioned the humidity. I mentioned air economization, hot and cold aisle containment, and certainly I mentioned also variable frequency drives. And that Oracle data center I mentioned, once we were able to shut down so many crack units, we then went back and started adding VFDs to the crack units that were shut down, and then we bring those on and then shut down the ones that didn't have and add those in there. And when we did this, now we could have all the crack units running at the same time, so we had good air distribution throughout the data center, right? The crack units that were shut off were not starving air to the servers that were near them. But now every single one of those crack units, we shut its minimum fan speed to 40%, and every single one went down to 40%. And this is common in all the examples that I work with. VFDs provide a tremendous improvement. So by going to 40% fan speed, we really dropped our energy use on the fan speed of those crack units basically to a quarter of what it was. A tremendous savings, and also made the data center a lot more quieter, a lot more comfortable. I mentioned close coupled water cooling, meaning trying to get water cooling into the data center which I know sometimes, is frowned upon, that's kind of the only way we get these higher densities. And so we have to use water out to the data center. We actually like it. It's more efficient, it's cheaper to operate, it's cheaper to build, cheaper to expand. It's really better in all regards. And we get the water as close as we can to the IT gear, meaning something like a rear door heat exchanger right on the server in some fashion, or heat exchanger right over or under the server in some fashion. And so getting the cooling system as close to the load as possible, we also gain some pretty dramatic savings. I mentioned a fan speed example at Oracle. Here's another one with a group called Evaporative, which I think is involved in some work here in Mumbai as well. We worked on a case study with them, and we just simply took these two pretty standard Liebherr air-cooled crack units. And by adding the VFDs, we were able to drop their fan speed down to basically about 60% of their speed. Right, the load went from that, you can see the numbers there, from about 7 kilowatts down to about 1.5 kilowatts. Tremendous difference, right? These are big numbers. And so now all of a sudden you think about that, that's a whole nother compute rack that you have a spare capacity for, power capacity for. So for your power capacity, all of a sudden now you've reclaimed it. Now you can use that power capacity for compute functions instead of using it for wasting it on fan energy. So there's a lot of real-world examples here. I also talked about, and this is really going to talk about new design. There's a lot of interesting new designs that we work on. This is a picture here. I know it might be hard to see in our diagram in the upper right there of a data center project that we worked on. That's a bit unique one, but we actually provide the cooling from below. And we did it this way because it ultimately improved the efficiency. And this is unusual. Normally we always provide the cooling from above. But in this case, it was so dense, the density this was designed for was designed for 500 watts a square foot, so about 50 watts a square meter, but designed to go as high as 1,500 watts per square foot, so 150 watts per square meter. It was very dense, and we had an interesting kind of building to work around and some space constraints and stuff. So anyways, I just kind of want to point out it's this interesting design or diagram. That's not really the key point. The key point is really that it has no crack units, no crawl units. We haven't used those in the design in years. And I get involved in leading a lot of designs for data centers. It has, in this case, it does have chillers, but the chiller is only designed to operate for about 100 hours a year, and that is it. Now, you think 100 hours a year, why would we even put them in? We really didn't need to put them in. The owner wanted at least to have a little bit there just in case their load increased or they had to need them for some computers that needed some different operating parameters. But other than that, there's no refrigeration. Really, for the most part, the chillers just stay off and don't run all year long. One of the things that we always do is we really, nowadays, don't use any raised floors. We were talking about this with a couple of folks at the lunch break. We haven't done raised floors in data center in quite a while. We just do concrete slabs, all the distributions overhead. We find it to be far more efficient from an energy, but also from a cost perspective. Raised floors cost money, they're a maintenance issue, you have to vacuum or need. We can't get the power densities under a raised floor at all. Raised floors always are a durability issue. They start cracking and peeling and all this stuff. And the data centers that I work on, racks are rolled in continuously. There's generally just people that all their job is to do every day is just roll in racks. The racks are in casters, pre-built out in the factory, full of the equipment. They just roll them in all day long. And so those raised floors get really beat up. And so because all these kind of downfalls of the raised floor, we find no efficiency benefit. We actually find it more efficient to cool from above for a variety of respects, that we do it this way. And then we also extract our hot air from above in almost all cases, all the networking, electrical distributions above. And we generally always use overhead busways, which is, depending on the country you're in, can be a difference in kind of what's normal or not normal. But we find it to be more efficient. It blocks the airflow less. We actually use it to help dam the airflow. And it's hard to get in this kind of short period of time, some of the details on this, but I'm just going to talk about some kind of, some of my basic ideas. Another example on a crack and crawl unit is we actually added ducted returns. So what I mean is that at the top of that crack unit is, roughly about as tall as I am, so roughly this high up, normally just draws the air back in if it's serving under a raised floor. Well, instead, all I did is add sheet metal ducting that went up as high as it could, close to the ceiling. The ceiling had a lot of extra space. The sheet metal ducting went up another 10 feet. And what we did is we increased the delta T. Remember, I talked about how important it is. Increased the delta T from about almost another 5 or 6 degrees, right? At 5 or 6 degrees Fahrenheit, again, gated stress more capacity back on those crack units, help them run more efficiently, help them break less, because now they're not turning on and off or short cycling so much. There's a lot of simple things you could do. That sheet metal ducting cost about, I want to say it's about $3,000 for about 10 crack units. $3,000 US. The payback in energy savings was 1 month. 1 month in energy savings, right? Simple little things can make a really big difference. So I mentioned air economization, and I really kind of look at economization as there's several different ways. There's air economization, which is commonly talked about, and that works in, in many climates, but certainly by no means not that many climates, or not all climates. And we can certainly use an enthalpy wheel or a heat wheel. Kyoto Cooling was a company that came out with the product, but heat wheels are common. They've been around for decades. There's nothing really new about them. And we can even do some different types of really, I want to get into kind of water and water cooling. Water economization is really the other key one. And really the key there is using evaporative cooling towers as much of them as possible, way oversizing those systems so we can get as much cooling capacity out of them, free cooling capacity out of them as possible. So we don't need to run those chillers or run them a lot less. But also one of the other key things that we've been doing too in a lot of data centers lately, and particularly in dry climates, this doesn't work in more humid climates, is we do a direct or indirect evaporative cooling. So we actually spray water, right, into the cooling system. And we use atomized spray, so it's very fine mist. And by doing so, we also provide more cooling effect. And on the days when it's not humid, this works very well. Or in climates where it's not humid, this works tremendously well. This is what Facebook's doing in their data center that's in Prineville, Oregon, also another one that they have on the east coast of the U.S., and also what they'll be doing in Sweden. And it provides them really all the cooling effect, or almost all the cooling effect they need. They really don't need, in some of these climates, any mechanical cooling at all because of it. And this is an example of some air economization that we worked on. This is a project we worked on. There's obviously, you can do a hot out containment, you can do a cold out containment. There's pros and cons to each. I'm not going to get into details right now. I just want to really show an example of what this can look like. This is on a again, no raised floor, just with a drop ceiling. And this is a very efficient design. This was designed back in, I want to think it was around 2006 or 2007. And it had a PUE 1.12, which in 2006, the PUE 1.12 was pretty darn good. Nowadays, the same kind of design, we're typically getting somewhere a little below 1.1. And by the way, this was in a very hot climate. This was in a climate where 110, 120 degrees Fahrenheit is reached every summer. So having that kind of a PUE of 1.12 is pretty darn good. And not needing air conditioning in most of the year, all because you're being really smart about drawing that outside air in as much as possible. I mentioned rear door heat exchangers. I think we're all familiar with them. There's just one concept. You don't necessarily have to buy the really expensive rear door heat exchanger. You can just buy anyone's heat exchanger for a lot less money and just build it into the back of your rack, or build it in, further away from the back of your rack so you can get access to the back of the rack like this example shows. There's a lot of ways to do this for less money. This works in good high density applications. It isn't so important in a lower density application. And for me, high density is, let's just say, is 10 kW or higher per rack, but really probably 20 kW or higher per rack. Most of the data center projects I get involved in, our average densities are usually between 10 and 15 kW a rack. I mentioned this at lunch too, and this is something we do in all of our data center projects, the CFD modeling, computational fluid dynamics. I know everybody's experience levels are different of what we work on and focus on, but in a data centers, in the infrastructure side, we always focus on always doing a good model of what the efficiency is going to look like. And you can do this in operational data center as well. And by doing this, you can see where the problem areas are. We did this in the Yahoo data center that was operational, and we did a CFD analysis, and we fine-tuned it. We found that there were a lot of little problem areas that we suspected, but now we're actually to visually see those problem areas where the cooling system couldn't really adequately cool the loads. So we CFD modeled it, fixed the problems, and we're able to go on with a great efficiency gain. Now, I mentioned temperature, humidity, broad nose. This range can be dramatic. That little, trapezoid there in the middle, that little, black, area in the middle is what ASHRAE used to tell us we should run our servers at. The problem with this is, why are we listening to a society of refrigeration engineers tell us what we should run our computers at? We should be listening to computer manufacturers. And when we listen to computer manufacturers, they all tell us every single computer manufacturer out there meets a minimum in that supply temperature of 90 degrees Fahrenheit. Most of them are good to 114 degrees Fahrenheit, inlet temperature, right? That means your cold aisle can be running at over 100 degrees Fahrenheit. And the server manufacturers are perfectly okay with that. So it's within their specifications. So again, we don't need to be running these data centers at 21 degrees C. We should be running them at 30 degrees C or even 40 degrees C. And the big users are doing this. And there's no issues, there's no reliability concerns, so long as we always work within certain parameters. So we expand those, and of course ASHRAE has recently expanded this dramatically based on those server manufacturers saying it was okay, right, to do so. This example I brought up earlier, this is a good friend of mine, Christian Bellotti at Microsoft, and a coworker of his. And you know, they basically get to experiment with a lot of things. So they built quite a few data centers. And so they put this data center in a tent and tested it out and ran that, you know, servers in there for almost a year. Leaves sucked into the server, the tent leaked water on the servers, they had no air conditioning, everything ran perfectly fine, right? You know, this is just one little example, but you can test these things out and see how they work before you go and move on to something, some big change. On the electrical systems, I talked about some of these things a little bit earlier. We generally always go to flywheel UPSs instead of a battery or static-based UPS. If we do use a static or battery-based UPS, we almost always do an offline version. So Eaton's got their eco mode, as they call it, well-branded solution. The bottom line is we don't need these Delta, you know, or double transformation UPSs. They don't gain us anything reliability. And if anything, when we actually look at the operational reliability of those UPSs, the manufacturers will tell you more reliable, but the actual data says they're not. They're actually less reliable. They're more complex, more things break on them, they have more issues. And the bottom line is that all server power supplies are all good for a complete outage of a quarter second, at least a quarter second, right? Complete outage. Little sags and surges on the grid don't hurt the servers at all. All server power supplies are designed from 100 volts AC to 250 volts AC, 50 hertz to 60 hertz. They can adjust automatically all the time. They adjust 20,000 times a second, right? A little blip on the grid is not going to hurt them, right? So UPSs don't really gain us much value. And so hence why a lot of companies just say, let me just get rid of the UPSs. If you do have UPSs in your data center, battery runtime is one of the key ways you can save money. Is that we used to always think of battery runtime as like being 30 minutes. Now we're down to 5 minutes at the most. In many data centers, especially with flywheels, we're at anywhere from 2 seconds to 15 seconds. And the reason why is because when we do the calculations and we say, if I lose, right, the power grid, how long can I actually operate before my servers go into thermal overload? Because our mechanical systems are not on UPS, generally go into mechanical overload within anywhere from 30 seconds to about 3 minutes. So having a UPS that serves any more than that doesn't gain us any value at all. There's nothing we can do. If the generators don't restart, you know, the servers will fail quickly in thermal overload. So having those extra battery runtime doesn't gain us anything. Because why? Because the outage is going to happen tonight at 2 a.m. in the morning, right? It's going to happen in the middle of the night, and by the time you get to the data center and can do anything about it, the servers will already be crashed on thermal overload. So the bottom line is having those extra, you know, runtime in minutes doesn't gain anything. We see no value of it. I mentioned before getting rid of transformers, PDUs. We don't do any PDUs in data centers at all. We just do higher voltage right to the racks. Generally, we buy power supplies for the rack that can handle the higher voltage. Like I said, a good example of this is on the Open Compute project, which you can pull up online. If you just search opencompute.org, you'll find out, or just type in opencompute.org into your browser. And I mentioned the overhead versus underfloor. I haven't mentioned AC versus DC. I've done a little bit of both. I'm not going to get into that. It really, there's not much of a difference. AC tends to cost less and be more common than DC, and they're both about the same efficiency. So we really see no value between AC versus DC distribution. Their key, though, really is metering. I mentioned it before. Meter everything you can. The servers, all your IT loads, as much down to detail as possible. And by knowing what's going on with every server, temperature, you can read the temperature off the motherboard on the servers, you can read it right out of the BIOS, you can read how much power is going in to many of the servers nowadays, and you can understand what's going on all the way down to every server level. So instead of just looking at it from an infrastructure side and seeing what your chiller is doing or your UPS is doing or the load of PDU, you can actually see all the way down to each and every rack, each and every board. And you gain a lot of benefits to understand what's going on in your system. So let's talk about some more electrical things here. All right. I mentioned the rotary UPSs. I mentioned even no UPSs at all as an option. I certainly have mentioned the higher volt distributions. 400 volts, for example, is one of those. And I've also mentioned really these lack of transformers or high efficiency transformers. Powersmiths is one brand of these really high efficiency transformers that we go to. And even things like LED lighting. And LED lighting may not seem really all that interesting in a data center. Lighting isn't in a data center because it's such a small part of our load. It's a fraction of a percent. But we actually went to, in some of the data centers, we did this in Facebook's data centers recently, is a company called Redwood Systems, another Silicon Valley startup. And they really have a fantastic control system for lighting. And we put this in a data center thinking, okay, we'll save a little bit of money because now not only every single light fixture is LED, it'll be a little more efficient, but every single light fixture shuts on and off by motion. And we realized there's some real benefits to that because instead of lighting the whole room in the data center, and some of these rooms are pretty big, 100,000 square feet or more per room, now instead of having all the lights on or off in that room as somebody goes into it, the lights simply, each fixture turns on as somebody rolls up to them. I say roll up to them because they'll use a skateboard or a razor or something like that. So as they walk through the data center, lights are turning on and they turn off behind them. So only the lights are on where that person is, and that's it. The other advantage this provides is not only do we only have basically 1% of the lights on in a big data center for 1% of the time instead of 90% of the lights on for 90% of the time, but the other big benefits provides, we actually know where any person is in a data center. And some of these companies, it's really important for them to know where people are in the data center. So now they can actually track people as they roll through a data center, as they walk through a data center, to know which rack they're at. If they know which rack they're at, they can actually open and unlock racks right where that person is if they have locks on their racks. So there's a lot of interesting things you can get from some of these other efficiency upgrades that we do. The other kind of key here is really phasing in that equipment. And this is really essential. We all know that, and I talked about this modularity, starting small, building as you go, right, as you need the load. So the load always matches, what you're building matches the demand of the business. This is a projected load ramp for a data center I worked on recently. This is, pretty typical of a data center. You'll see a picture there of a containerized data center. That one's Microsoft's data center. I worked on one for Google as well years ago. And the reason why really they do these container data centers is not because containers are cheaper and more efficient. They're not. In all of our examples, they cost more and they're less efficient. But the benefit of them is they're very quick to refresh. They are modular, right? And so they can phase in that equipment as they go in these nice big blocks, big modules. So remember always to phase in that equipment as much as you can. And from what I've heard today from the other speakers, you guys are doing that, and that's great. It's fantastic. It's really, really wonderful to hear all this, a lot of the good stuff taking place. So let's talk about how some of this applies into retrofitting a data center. A lot of it's the same, right? Is that really, it's hot and cold isolation. It's making sure you have variable frequency drives. It's making sure you have ducted returns, as I talked about. Blanking panels and racks. If you have empty spots on racks, blank them off. Dramatic improvement on efficiency. Simple things can save a lot of money. In one case, in the blanking panels, we didn't want to go out and buy all these $3 per blank plastic panel. We just simply put tape. We bought tape 1 3/4 inch wide and just put a piece of tape across there. Very cheap, very efficient, easy to pull off when you go to install a server in there. I mentioned this earlier as well, is making sure you're turning off equipment. So companies like IE and PowerSure actually turn on and off equipment automatically. You can also have applications custom written. There's other applications that are written to do this. It's really valuable. And like I said earlier, all the big players are already doing this, right? In their data centers, we have lots of servers. So the other key really is pretty quick refresh rates. I mentioned this before, and like I said, the refresh rates are generally pretty quick. We find it economic to replace equipment, usually at about every 2 years. So at about every 2 years, we find it cheaper to go and replace that hardware than it is to keep it. And this is going to change by every business and by how you're using it and how your systems are set up and so on. I mentioned the humidity and temperature ranges. One of the big changes we found a lot of data centers is they have heaters installed on the crack units, which you don't need heaters in a data center, right? The servers will run fine down to 0 degrees Fahrenheit. They'll run fine to freezing. They don't really care. You don't need heaters. Shut them off. We found a lot of data centers that sometimes one crack unit's heating, one's cooling, or just fighting each other. We find the same thing on humidity. One's dehumidifying, one's humidifying. You generally don't need one. I mean, you only need one. You don't need both, right? Either in a humid environment, you need to dehumidify, or in a dry environment, you need to humidify. Or you don't need either, right? So this is something that we've been doing in data centers for years. Just shut off what you don't need. It's quite simple. All right, so let's get in a little bit to hardware and software solutions, because this is really where the greatest savings is really being made today. I mentioned this turning off of the equipment, right? Average processor utilization in the industry is about 8 to 10%. We're seeing with virtualization, we're getting to about 15%. If you look at your utilization on the processor, you'll probably see it's something in that range, 10 to 20%. So it's not very good. That means for 80% of the time, if you're at 20% utilization, 80% of the time that servers sit on doing nothing. This is what I mean by turning equipment off. If you could turn your equipment off 80% of the time, think how much money you could save, right? So these things make big differences, and this is where we really have to try to take a look at this equipment. And these are not like I said, these are common numbers for the industry. So by replacing servers, older servers, if you keep getting a bunch of servers away and virtualizing, we can usually get that utilization up to some degree. But still, even getting to like a 50% utilization is very challenging. So just things to think about. But these are big savings that we can have. This is a chart really also on the planning of a data center. We see this as the loads go up over time. The bottom there and those bottom curves are the load. And the green bars are really the capacity coming on. This is compute capacity, right? It could be any kind of capacity, but really scaling in that compute capacity as you need it. This way you don't have servers or other equipment sitting around idle, not really doing a whole lot. This is a product called AdCap, which is a product from a company called Lumina, and Lumina makes some really good capacity planning and data analysis tools. Okay, so we've talked about virtualization. I was asked earlier, is virtualization cloud computing? And I would say absolutely not. The two are certainly not even the same. But this, of course, depends on what your perception is or your position of how you view it. But the bottom line is virtualization. We're all using it. Continue to use it. Continue to virtualize more applications. You do gain a lot of benefits back from that. Look at the results from that, right, and really watch it. And see over time as results change. Just because you virtualize doesn't mean you're still not going to be able to gain more benefit in the future. You can virtualize more, or something's not also becoming less efficient over time, because it will. So really focus on that. I mentioned some of these monitoring analysis tools out there. There's a lot of great tools, and these are some on my list. I mean, there's a lot. Your efficiencies we're gaining from virtualization have been, it's been around for obviously and heavily used for over a decade. I mentioned this earlier, is that most of the savings are not because we're virtualizing just per se and getting rid of physical servers. Most of the savings come from the fact that we're actually shutting off servers that aren't being used. So again, this comes back to that point that I mentioned earlier. Always look at your servers and see what they're doing. If they're not being used all the time, shut them off when they're not being used, or virtualize them, right? You'll at least gain some efficiencies that way. And like I said, we find most of the servers in a data center to be underutilized. So we can either virtualize or we can shut them off. And so just a key point to bring up, roughly 80% of the savings in virtualization come from shutting off these unused servers. It's kind of silly to think that you would drive to the office and leave your car running all day outside the office and then drive back home, get out of the office for the day and your car's still running. That's kind of what we're doing with our servers. So, why we're doing that? Let's turn these things off if they're not needed at that time. Obviously, this is a no-brainer when it comes to hardware, choosing more efficient hardware. I mentioned you can certainly look at the Energy Star ratings. That's at least one way. It's not a perfect way, but that's one way. You can certainly look at performance metrics that come from that manufacturer. You can do your own performance monitoring of that server, test it out, and try it out with how you're running your servers in your data center. And one of the key things I mentioned earlier too is really buy a more efficient power supply. Most power supplies today are 80% efficient, meaning 20% of the energy is wasted. Think about that, 20%. That's a lot. Because you think about that, that's 20% of your UPS capacity is completely wasted. That means 20% of your heat load in your data center is completely wasted. So that means you can regain back that much of capacity just by going to a 100% efficient power supply. Today, buying a 90 to 95% efficient power supply is a no-brainer. It's easy, it's very economic, it's cheap to do. Everybody offers it. So think about just simple things like that. Just power into the server, less waste just going into the server. Less heat, you have to remove everything else. And again, I mentioned this earlier, almost in all cases we find that memory is a bottleneck in servers, right? And this is going to vary by application and so on, but take a look at that. As we're monitoring, look at your monitoring tools, really monitoring your servers and seeing where they're at. You may be able to determine that, that you may be able to actually, improve performance by increasing memory. And there's faster forms of memory and things like that too, as we're all familiar with. Solid state's another way. Everybody's going to it. It's a slow change, just as it all is. We're all on the same road together. We're all changing out, from spin drives to solid state drives where we can. Look at using solid state drives in applications where it really makes sense, where you have some I/O degradation or performance issues. Solid state drives generally, really can improve your performance there. And I mentioned earlier the ARM processor-based servers. So imagine a server the size of our mobile phone, right? This is one whole entire server today that Calxeda is making. It's literally about the exact same size. It provides the same compute performance as Intel's standard processor out today, one of their standard processors, multi-core. It has actually more memory on board and more actual onboard storage, all solid state, than a typical server will have. And so it has far better throughput. So, and like I said earlier, Calxeda is actually putting about 1,500 of these into a rack. Well, HP is building a product set that uses it. 1,500 equivalent servers in one rack using only 8 kilowatts, right? And only one of these devices, each one's use 5 watts. The whole entire rack can run on just one. So it can immediately shut off every single one if they're not needed. So it automatically scales the processing performance based on exact needs of demand. Now, granted, this product has just been released just a few months ago, and so it's not like it's been, it's widely used yet. Things to think about going forward, right? Really look for that. Think about the improvements that can make. And also, another kind of thing to think about too is, what kind of air conditioning are you providing to this server that's in your pocket, right? What kind of humidity controls are you providing to the server in your pocket? Absolutely none. You drop it and it still runs perfectly fine. You spill a little water on it and it still runs perfectly fine, right? These are very durable. And so this server that's right now in my pocket, right, is the same server that we will have in our data centers. Already being tested out today by several large companies. And so now think about it. Now you have this server that was designed and built to not really need any air conditioning or any humidity controls, right? And it's running in your data center. So we even get that much more advanced as far as our air conditioning systems go. We can now raise those temperature set points, humidity set points. So things to think about going forward as far as temperature controls and so on. You may even need less of them in the future. Most likely you will. Okay, so a little more on the hardware. We talked about some of this stuff. How many people are familiar with SPEC? S-P-E-C. Okay, I see a couple hands. You can go to the SPEC power supply information on the website, and you can pull up information on actually the performance per server to its energy use. And you can actually choose which server is more efficient. Lumina, that software tool I mentioned earlier, also does this and does this quite well. It's built into their tool set. And so now all of a sudden you can really take a look at what's the useful work and true output of that server, right? And they're starting to do this for some storage and other devices, and to its actual operating expense. So now you can actually make a choice and make sure you're buying a server that's going to cost you the least to run down the road. Because a more expensive server doesn't necessarily mean it's going to be cheaper to operate. Many times it isn't. So really knowing that, knowing exactly to make your best buying decisions is very vital. You can work with the manufacturers or the vendors that you buy your servers from. This is an example that we actually worked on here, and it may be a little hard to read this, so I'll read some of it out loud. But we actually looked at 2 different types of server sets, some one-use servers, some little pizza boxes, to some blade servers. And we looked at these 2 different ones, and we came out that basically the blade server in this example, because the application said it was running and so forth, was slightly cheaper, slightly lower total cost of ownership, even though it did cost a little more up front, right? And many times we find that's not necessarily the case that it costs more up front, but in this case it did. So just kind of one thing to take a look at. This is from that Lumina tool I talked about. It's hard to, again, read these graphs from probably where you are. Even I can't read them on the monitor up here. But essentially what this shows is that basically shows compute performance to energy use, and for a variety of different servers out there. And so you can actually compare the servers next to each other. So if you have some different servers you think about buying, you can look at this tool set, whether it's through Lumina or some other tool set out there, and you can actually see what that performance is. And by seeing what that performance is, you can say, oh, this server is going to be better for me. It's going to cost me less over time. And that's really key, right? You want to spend less over time. You want to have more money, do more things within the future. I mentioned earlier, and this has been mentioned by others, is these anti-vibration racks. I know it's a fairly new thing in storage. We find, as I said, that throughput can be cut down dramatically by vibration. There's actually a video on YouTube of an engineer at Sun Microsystems, which of course now is Oracle, of him simply talking loudly at a server and not touching it. I mean, storage device, not touching it, just talking loudly at it. And by talking loudly at that storage device, it decreased its throughput to half. That little bit of vibration from his voice, right? Vibration's an amazing enemy to storage throughput. And it's really throughput you care about. Obviously, total capacity too. But we need more capacity to give us more throughput. So now, instead of buying more capacity than you need, things like anti-vibration racks, there's a company called Green Platform Systems that builds some great ones. Again, Green Platform, check them out. I think it's pretty neat stuff. There's other people that make them. Some of the OEMs like NetApp and so forth are also starting to OEM those. So anyways, that's another kind of interesting thing. And again, I talked about refreshing. I talked about decommissioning those unused servers, really just virtualizing them or getting rid of them if you aren't needing them. Very simple things we can do to improve the efficiency. So kind of with that, I'm just going to go ahead and wrap up with going through some of these key things that I mentioned to really think about when it comes to making your data center more efficient. Number one, measure. Measure everything you possibly can, as much as you can in your data center. The more you measure, probably the better you are as far as savings go. Microsoft found this out. The more they measured, the more the savings they got back. eBay, same thing. As long as you're sharing that data and making use of it, you will gain more benefits from it. Really, making sure you're integrating all these teams together, as I talked about. Everybody's working on everything and sharing that information, right? And really assigning a key person or persons to manage the efficiency of the system. So a lot of these companies I work with, they have somebody who does nothing but will look at the efficiency every day of their systems. These are big data centers that make sense, these big data centers. I'm not saying you should all hire somebody just to watch the efficiency, but if you had somebody every day just at least looking at some reports, seeing how their systems are doing, you will gain efficiencies from that. And again, you really have to think about it, holistically. So it's not just a focus on efficiency, but it's also looking at the whole entire system. I mentioned really, if you're going to do one thing on the infrastructure, it's separate out the hot and cold aisles. That one alone, the biggest savings of all. And again, really matching the reliability and environmental needs of your equipment and your business to what you're actually building and operating in your data center. Do you really need, again, all that UPS capacity? Do you need everything on UPS? Do you need everything to be running at such tight temperature and humidity controls? All that stuff. And I mentioned on the hardware side, if you can do one thing on the hardware side, choose efficient hardware and make sure you're always buying efficient power supplies. So upgrading your power supplies to the more efficient one. And then on the operations side, turning off equipment as it needed, whether it's through virtualization, sending stuff to the cloud, which doesn't always turn the servers off, but it is another way to help with that. Or just literally going and turning equipment off, buying software does it for you automatically. Microsoft does this. When you go to the any of their Azure platforms or licensing platforms, anything you see, their servers are turning on and off all the time, all day long. They do this across the board for all their stuff, both internal IT and external IT. And they buy an off-the-shelf product, right? They buy OneEase product. They don't even have their own product to do this. A company that, the biggest software, manufacturer in the world. So think about those things, right? Even the biggest software manufacturer in the world realizes a lot of their servers are not doing any real useful work all the time. So they even use this off-the-shelf product to do this for them. And again, thinking about everything in total cost of ownership terms. And I talked about kind of locations too. One idea here is, as I mentioned, this Reno Technology Park that I've been working on, right, is if you can put your data centers in locations where the climate is more attractive, right, or you don't need things like UPSs, you can gain a lot of benefits. And you don't necessarily have to have your data center right in that big city. Like I said, we're already seeing this in not just in the U.S., but certainly throughout Europe. And we're going to start seeing it more here in Asia. We're not going to see our data centers always located right at where the submarine cables come in. It isn't always necessary. Sometimes there's benefits to it not being that way. And so it depends on where your data centers are, but every environment's a little different. But anyways, this is just one example that gains a lot of advantages because of this. So it ends up lowering your total cost dramatically. And if I can end just on kind of one point I'd like to make, and this is a statistic or a quote from the American Council for an Energy Efficient Economy. And this is kind of an interesting quote. I'll read it to you. I think this really matters. It's salient to not just what we do in data centers. It's not just the U.S. It's salient to, important to here in India and everywhere else, is that the U.S. economy could expand more than 70%, right, through 2030 and use 11% less electricity than in 2008 because of energy efficiency advances associated with semiconductor technologies. And what they mean is by in data centers and everything that we do in data centers, right? And so by their calculations alone, that savings is about $1.3 trillion US dollars by 2030. Big numbers, right? Really big numbers. So this is definitely true here in India, no doubt about it. And all the data centers I've been in here in India, every single one I've taken a look at, there's a lot of inefficiencies, right? And there's a lot of inefficiencies in every data center I go into, everywhere. And so if we can improve the efficiency of our data centers, we not only can make back more money in our economy because we're spending less on energy, we're spending less on waste. Now more money goes back into our business. We can now make more money, and we can put it to more productive uses like growing our businesses. So just something to think about is that we all are helping to make our businesses more efficient, right? Whatever we do in our data centers to make them more efficient, whether it's going to a cloud-based application, internal, external, virtualizing, or implementing some of these other ideas I've talked about, we are making our businesses more efficient and thus the economy more efficient. So keep focused on that, and we all ultimately get better together. So with that, I want to certainly thank you all so much for hanging around. I know it's late in the day, and are there any questions you'd like to open up to, or should we wrap up? Okay. All right, sounds like we have a little time for some questions. So I want to certainly feel free to take any questions if you do have any questions out there. Every question is a good question. So don't be afraid to ask a question. Now I can actually see you. The lights are so bright when it's dark out there, it's hard to see anybody out there. All right, anybody have any questions? Or is everybody anxious to get to food and drinks later? Good. Well, I think we're pretty much on time for that. So thanks everyone so much, and thanks again, Saltmarsh, for having me today.